Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, to Angelo Robles' Effective Family Office podcast, where I look to distill the best practices and best ideas of the world's most successful families and their family offices. I hope to provide thought-provoking opinions and feature amazing thought leaders to our listeners of the podcast with an eye towards the future of the family office. Well, welcome everyone. Today's podcast is titled From Wall Street to Entrepreneurship to VC and a Family Office. That's quite an encompassing degree that we're going to cover, but among our two guests, one has truly an amazing background relative to all those things I noted. So we have two guests today. We're featuring today Courtney Reum, co-founder of M13, a VC, and also a single-family office, and Sly Lee, co-founder and CEO of Emerge. So Sly is an entrepreneur that Courtney, through M13, has an investing in. So they're each going to have varying perspectives. And Courtney also has experience as an entrepreneur with exits as well. So everyone knows that startups, angel, VC, and creating something from nothing is among our favorite subjects that we cover. And really, that's how the vast majority of family offices effectively get created, whether it's this generation or one from generations ago. It starts with an idea and really develops into something that quote unquote makes it and then is sustainable. So why don't we start by me being a gentleman for a change and welcoming Courtney and Sly to the show. Gentlemen, how are you?
Great, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, we have so much to cover and really excited to have both of you on. So Courtney, we're going to start with you. And by the way, that's Courtney Reum, spelled R-E-U-M. And really a cool company name there, M13. So Courtney and his brother, who we don't have on today, are the co-founders of M13. We'll probably have them on jointly together at one point in the future. But that title that I gave, from Wall Street to entrepreneurship to VC and SFO, I mean, you're so young to have done all of this in your lifetime. What led you from college to classically working on Wall Street?
Yeah, well, a few of those monikers you gave me are definitely accidental ones, meaning didn't know what I wanted to do after college, graduated from Columbia, thought I was going to do something maybe entrepreneurial. This is early 2000s when no one I knew was an entrepreneur. And my dad, who's kind of my hero and mentor, convinced me that there was worse things in the world than going to work at Goldman Sachs and learning your craft, or at least some craft there. And so that's how it started. It was kind of an accidental banker. I don't know if they still do it, but at the time at Goldman Sachs, they do these little, I don't know what you call it, kind of like you would do in high school, senior superlatives, where they would say most likely to fill in the blank. And I was pretty much a runaway in getting voted most likely to quit after training, which was 1 month. And I think I voted for myself too. And so the fact that I did it for a number of years surprised me as much as anyone, but I'm very thankful for the experience and the training.
And then you left. I mean, this must make dads all around the world be aghast. You get accepted into Goldman, you're there, you're showing progress, you're doing well, and oh yeah, I'm going to leave that all behind and create something from nothing where I'm not going to draw a salary and probably not going to make it and become an entrepreneur. What kind of company did you start?
Yeah, if you only knew, Angelo, because you're right. Any dad's worst nightmare, except for the fact that I have a brother who you mentioned who's 2 years younger. And he also went to Columbia and also worked at Goldman Sachs. So the joke in our family was my dad used to go, I have two sons and they both work at Goldman Sachs. And then a couple of years later, he's like, I have two sons. We decided to leave to be entrepreneurs. This is, 2006, 2007, initially. Doesn't sound that long ago, but at the time it was the heyday of hedge funds. And I literally only had friends in my Goldman or Wall Street circles at the time that stayed at Goldman, went to private equity or went to hedge funds. So it was really weird that we were entrepreneurs, but we left to start. I was in the consumer products group at Goldman, so I loved brands. I helped take Under Armour public. worked on Vitamin Water's first deal, and then ultimately we left to start the first organic and sustainable vodka-esque brand called Vive.
Oh, that became that's an interesting story. Now, we're not going to focus as much on that today, but I believe you had an exit with that, correct?
Yes, we sold it about 4 years ago to, let's just say, a group out of St. Louis that people can probably discern. There's some interesting family dynamics there. But yeah, built it up from selling out of the back of a Prius for 6 months in Southern California to eventually getting picked up by the biggest distributor in America. And by the time we sold, we were doing over 1 million bottles a year and had it in, Virgin American Airlines and was the #1 selling cocktail in Disney and different properties like that. So, but it was every bottle was a slog, but it was an incredible journey.
Yeah, to say the least. So then deciding to become a VC gives you the innate experience, which is always preferred, of relating to your entrepreneurs, to knowing what it's like to potentially go to a great school, to have a traditional job that most people would die for, to leave that behind, create a company or companies, and then have a successful exit gives you insight, which is why you became a VC. But if you could tell us a little bit about that transition from your exit to becoming a VC/investor family office.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I said, a lot of parts of this were accidental. The Goldman part was kind of accidental, or I went kicking and screaming. Becoming a VC was definitely a bit of an accidental thing too. But to your point, you nailed it when you said, I think for my brother and I, over the course of starting Vive, running our alcohol brand, we would get these really interesting opportunities, and we knew that's not what we were going to do for the rest of our lives, but it was a great springboard or platform. So by the time we sold Vive, we had actually made a couple dozen angel investments, and some of them had gone really well. For people listening, Ring, the video doorbell that Amazon bought for $1.1 billion, we put in some of the first $1 million for that. We were very early in things like Lyft and Pinterest and Bonobos, different brands like that. So it's not like we had done none of it, but for us, when we sold Vive, we were really believers that being entrepreneurs made us better investors, and being investors made us better entrepreneurs. So it was kind of this virtuous circle, and said, wouldn't it be great if we could start a company in that vein where we could do both the things we like to do and hopefully find innovative approaches to do that. So you touched on our name M13, which obviously we're biased, but we really like. M13 is the brightest cluster of stars in the Western Hemisphere, whereby the sum of the whole shines greater than the individual parts. So it's this idea of putting the pieces together, connecting the dots, all the things we're trying to do with M13 now. So we started a consumer tech holding company. My brother's background was more tech, mine was more consumer. The world's meeting in the middle. So we started a consumer tech holdco or platform, whereby we have a couple arms. One is our M13 Venture Capital Fund, which we're honored to have Sly be a part of. And then we also have, we call it our launch pad, but it's basically a brand studio. And so we've started a handful of brands out of that. We have a joint venture with Procter & Gamble, where we're about to launch our third brand. We did a brand in partnership with Target last year. I guess some employees that ended up leaving Target to run this. And then we're in various stages with other folks on brands. So it's great because from my brother and I's point of view, I get to be a venture capitalist and still feel like I'm being entrepreneurial. And the goal is to really have a venture capital firm that operates a little differently than most firms, and show that there's some repeatability to building consumer tech brands. And so really our secret sauce is this third arm of our firm called Propulsion, which is where about 2/3 of our 30-something employees sit, and they work cross-functionally on brands that we invest in and brands we start. And so to just bring that to life, pretend we have 5 or 6 verticals. So one of them is data strategy. No startup can afford a partner level head of data strategy, nor do they probably need it. But hopefully someone like Sly says, oh, I need help with this, this, and this. And Rob Olson, who's our head of data strategy, will be helping Sly one day, be helping another portco one day, and then the next day he could be working on some of our startup brands. So it's a great way to effectively diffuse the cost and kind of help these brands scale up faster.
Excellent. We'll have a lot of follow-up questions for you, Courtney, but let's switch it over to Sly Lee, co-founder, CEO of Emerge, a wonderful entrepreneur. Well, I guess I could start with you, Sly. Did you even graduate from college? Because you know how the young entrepreneurs are. They probably just left in the freshman or sophomore year. But what made you decide that you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
Hey, Angelo, and yeah, I did graduate college.
Okay.
I had a very
Okay. The
having
parents are
Asian
happy then, at least partially. Okay.
Yeah, my Asian parents are happy in that I graduated college and I initially pursued a medical degree, fulfilling one of three acceptable professions under the Asian parenthood
And
vision.
then you leave that behind.
Well, similar to Courtney, I didn't necessarily plan to be an entrepreneur. I have just always been on this path to try to have the biggest impact that I can as an individual with people I really flow together with. And so, that saying that, talent is equally distributed, but opportunities are not. Well, that was really true in my case. My parents are immigrants. I grew up in Mississippi in the deep South. And, for those people on the podcast, I don't look like everyone in Mississippi looks like. And so having a very interesting childhood and just taking opportunities as they came, eventually I found myself working in Hawaii as a scientist, wanting to have impact on the environment and the world, but eventually found myself being kind of disinterested at the scale of the impact I was having. Just prototyping with different technologies and different organizations. I eventually found myself at this NASA and Google funded program called Singularity. And that's when I met my co-founders of Emerge. Yeah, it's kind of like a big nerd camp for like big kids.
Yes, it is. I wish I could go.
Yeah, I recommend it. And that's where I really found my true calling and what we're doing at Emerge. I had found two people that really aligned with the legacy that I wanted to leave behind, which is to have had a meaningful impact into how we communicate with our loved ones when not physically present with them. Because my two co-founders, Isaac Castro and Mauricio Turan, they're also immigrants. The people that we care about are really far away. Especially now more than ever with COVID, everyone's apart from people they really care about. But at the time, almost 5 years ago now, we realized that we're extremely limited in our ability to communicate with one another. And a lot of the world's greatest technologies and advancements were built on communication as the baseline, right? To communicate and connect people. Yet, in the virtual space, we were limited to just two senses. We still are today, our sight and sound. And as we made huge leaps in past history of humanity from, telegraph or letters to telegraph to telephones to video call, each one of those leaps was foundational for society. And we wanted to create the next future leaps. So we wanted to create a company that wasn't just a one-off app or one-off product, but actually that would create multiple products and hopefully multiple paradigms to define what it means to connect with someone when we're not physically there. And I can explain a little bit about what that means, but that's kind of a generic, real high level background on how I got to here today and how we came together as co-founders.
That's an amazing story. So they say that co-founders, although you're going to share certain things on work ethic, on character, you're also going to want to have a different perspective. So one may be more the technologist, one more the creative type. Where do you fit in your spectrum with your fellow entrepreneurs?
We're a pretty different founding team, actually, in that we're mostly all three generalists, but you're right, we do fall into a specific category. So Isaac, who's our CTO, has a lot of skills in different areas, but he was the most technical of us and had the vision to how we could even create a product out of something as nebulous as what I just mentioned. Mauricio, who is my co-founder and our CFO, has a background and has been a CFO previously, but also just very talented in the marketing side and the business development side. But we sort of fell into these roles, and for lack of better fit, I became the CEO because I really like relationships and people, and I think they thought my accent was the nicest out of the three of us. So here I
am. Well, of course, I got the most important question for you. Being a good old country boy from Mississippi, I am assuming you're an SEC football fan.
Yeah, a little bit. Not as I like
just enough to be a little dangerous.
With a U. I like football with a U, but yeah, I definitely followed my alma mater, Ole Miss, and the saying goes down there for the good old boys. We didn't win every game, but we never lost a party. And my school was like the number 2 party school, I think, in the nation, behind Florida.
And how about good old Southern cooking? Come on, how did that kind of contribute to
Oh
your
yeah,
entrepreneurship?
yeah, I love Southern food. It's when I do visit Mississippi again, I eat all of the bad foods that no one eats here in Venice, California, right? Grits and cornbread and catfish and all the things that make you just fall asleep immediately.
It sounds delicious, though.
Oh
We'll have
yeah.
to save that discussion a little bit for a different time. So, when you and your co-founders got together and starting to build something that was really special, and we are going to have a demonstration shortly. I'm going to go through a series of other questions with Courtney, then come back to Sly, where he's going to do a brief demonstration, which for the live audience and for my YouTube audience will be great. But we'll be able to walk through my audience that hears it on a podcast as well. So it'll be awesome. But I do want to ask you, what made you decide among the options that you had on Courtney and his brother at M13?
That is the easiest question actually. Whenever people ask us, Courtney's heard this before too. This kind of goes back, if you bear with me a little bit, back to what kind of company we wanted to build. So we originally started in Silicon Valley, like most startups that dream of creating, a technology startup. I mean, we had the very, hopeful beginnings too. And in Silicon Valley, my co-founders and I, we lived in Mark Zuckerberg's second mansion in his gym. We couldn't afford a whole room, so we lived in his old gym together. And we started there, had a lot of good juju, blessed in the early days. But when we looked at what type of company we wanted to create, we saw LA being a much better fit for us because we wanted to create a company with people at its core, with empathy and bonding at its core, and didn't want to be caught up in the whole kind of same old status quo in Silicon Valley. Even though it is much bigger than the LA ecosystem, LA network for startups and VCs is just skyrocketing. And so we wanted to be part of growing that community. And when we looked around and, we talked to lots of VCs around the world and in Silicon Valley, of course. But when we saw and when we talked to partners that really aligned with our vision, Courtney and Carter just sold us immediately. I mean, the vision around community, like number one, that they're already building here in LA. I mean, it's been really exciting to be a part of that. And then everything Courtney just mentioned about the propulsion team is not just lip service. Like day one, we got Christine Choi, who was the former marketing and branding of Richard Branson's entire portfolio. She helped us create our brand from day one,
Wow.
our website, our marketing launch. Matt Hoffman with people. We hit the ground running. We said, we need to hire all of these executives now. Where do we even find these people? He helped us set up a procedure and process in place. And of course, our key partner, Latif Paracha, having a lot of experience being on the boards of Slack and Ring Doorbell, just adds so much value to our go-to-market, like at a very hands-on level. And of course, Courtney and Carter being the visionaries and just incredibly like open to listening to our problems because they've been there before as founders and they're helping us
Absolutely.
avoid the slip-ups that our competitors will face.
Yeah, that's excellent. And shortly, we're going to see a demonstration visually, and you'll walk us or talk us through it as well in terms of what you're doing. So stay tuned. I'm going to switch back to Courtney. There's lots of earlier stage investors in VC. It's a very, very, very crowded market. How do you stay competitive and attract entrepreneurs? How do you find them and strategically elect to narrow down and make an investment when there's so much mutual competition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're definitely hoping that this current state of the economy, which I'm probably a little more pessimistic on than the S&P would currently reflect, might separate some of the hobbyists from the professional investors. But I also think, more than anything, it comes down to hopefully just explaining how we got here, because as you pointed out, we've been entrepreneurs. We've had a couple other companies we've started. So I think we relate more than most. Obviously, we're not the only entrepreneurs turned VCs, but I do think we're the only ones that have set up an organization the way we have. You listen to most VCs and everyone agrees, okay, product is a platform, but that usually means we hired a community manager, one or two people, which is still great and a step in the right direction. But as I said earlier, I have 30 something people and 2/3 of them work on different product expertises, data, brand and comms, acquisition, distribution, people, talent, and culture. These are real things where we try to add real value. And so to me, our best way to hopefully close the next Sly Lee is to either have him talk to Sly and say, hey, they've talked a big game about doing this, this, and this. Did they really deliver on it? And so I think if we're architected differently and therefore add different value, then hopefully reputationally and success-wise, that'll beget more great entrepreneurs and great deals.
And adding to that too, what Courtney mentioned, Angelo, is it's so right. We talk to VCs and they always say we're operators at the core. But what really stood out was before they even invested in us, as we talked to the partners and started working with them, they're top of the game in their field, because Courtney mentioned in data science, marketing, et cetera. But Christine is one of maybe a handful of people in the world that can do what she does at her caliber. So they've really assembled this sort of like Avengers of sorts at the partnership and a propulsion team level.
And you did mention, Courtney, with the somewhat different expertise and background of you and your brother. So consumer discretionary spending kind of meets the future of consumer tech over the next decade. There's lots of things exponentially growing. You want to focus in on where you and your brother are going to be a powerful 1-2 punch, but you don't want to be too broad and do everything. So developing your brand and reputation in your given niches, which is a great market, how do you think that market will evolve in the next decade?
Yeah, we say all consumer tech, which can have a broad or a narrow definition. We're really focused on discretionary spending, which is still the biggest share of wallet for all U.S. spending. So that's important to us. And then I think over the course of our career, if I told you some other investments we've made, I think we've been futurist would probably be too strong a word, but I think we've been good at looking around corners and seeing trends. And so, as I always like to say to people, if we can stay 6 months ahead of a lot of trends, we're going to be very successful. And people scoff or laugh when I say 6 months, but because there are ones that are potentially a lot more than 6 months, like what Sly's doing with Emerge. But then there's a lot of things where at the speed of innovation, the world's moving. If I stay 6 months ahead of you, that's light years. As they say, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And so we're really focused on what the world is going to look like in 2030 and beyond. And we always keep that as our North Star, and then how consumer brands applying technology to them and then overlaying, media in different ways is going to be at the forefront of that convergence.
Before we get to Sly's presentation, one more question for now, at least for you, Courtney, and I'll give a little bit of framework to it. There is a trend among family offices that often don't have the youthful, relatively recent entrepreneurial background and exit. So you're unique as a VC and family office, but there is a trend with family offices becoming more active direct investors, saying that they could do what the professionals do, that they don't need to pay 2 and 20. And there are times, depending on their background, their connectivity and luck, where there may be some truth to that, but the VC world is a tough world to do it half-baked, so to speak. It's way too competitive. And the entrepreneurs, I think, are going to want to go with options with people like you that have been operators, that are investors, that have a deep bench and network. What I'm getting to is I had Jason Calacanis on about 2 months ago, and the tough one is going to be, we basically looked him in the eye on Zoom and say, do some entrepreneurs look at family offices as the last stop, as almost dumb money? And what he basically said was, yes, he polished it up a little bit. There's always exceptions. There's some that are amazing. There's some that have built out internal teams. But for the most part, yeah, they do it haphazard. And really, that entrepreneur that has great potential, don't you think they've been kicked around Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, LA? And the answer is probably yes, but how would you answer that?
Yeah, I don't think of it as dumb money. One, because if you're a family office, you probably did something smart to get your money at some point, but I think of it as, this is painting with a broad brush, but I think of it a little more as kind of hands-on versus hands-off money, right? And so we make it very clear, and in the courting process, we're trying to win deals. If you want money that will, if you want to see X amount of dollars in your bank account and then not hear from us again, that's not us. We're, as my dad likes to say, we're all up in your business. And so, but hopefully in a positive way, entrepreneurship is a team mission, and no matter how good you are, we've certainly had great entrepreneurs who think they're going to use us a little bit day one, and 6 months they're using us for a lot of ways they never thought. As a general rule, a lot of family offices aren't set up to be super operational or hands-on and everything else. And so I think it just depends. What I would caution, and again, I say this is, as you said, my brother and I have, just kind of started our family office in the last 18, 24 months, is if you're someone that's dabbling, just be careful not to, if you made 5 investments and 1 worked out, good for you. You got really lucky, in my opinion. If you're committed to it, you're committed to it. I mean, this is if you're going direct, not funds, because it sure is, I trust myself inherently, but it's sure hard to pick 5 and make it work. You need enough diversification and breadth there. And so I think, from our point of view, what we try and say is, having been in the shoes of family offices and having been advisors and GPs and LPs and other VC funds and a customer of VC, is if we can offer you a lot more transparency, a lot more learnings about industries that you want to learn more about, maybe know something about, but want to stay in touch with the industry, and frankly, co-invest. I mean, every VC kind of says it, but we've done about 4 co-invests already in just over a year. So we've backed up the bus on that. But I think those are the things that really a venture firm can offer a family office, in my opinion, besides hopefully great returns. But obviously that takes time.
For sure. Sly, I think it's time for a little bit of show and tell. So while you're kind of taking control, and I'll probably take 10, 15 seconds for you to pull up, I'll kind of fill the space a little bit. So feel free to start to go into your screen share. So everyone, again, Sly Lee is the entrepreneur that M13 has an investment in, and he's doing something really intriguing, especially during kind of COVID times where human touch, contact, and how we kind of communicate uniquely has been impacted, has been challenged. Now, again, if you're in the opportunity to be a live attendee as one of my members, great, you're going to see it. If you watch this on YouTube, and by the way, my channel is Family Office on YouTube, great. But we do understand there'll be thousands of people that are going to hear this on a podcast. So Sly's going to do the best he could walking you through what he's visually showing, so your mind's eye could kind of paint the picture. Sly, why don't I give the floor to you?
Thank you, Angelo. And I'll do my best to explain it, what you would see, and even harder, what you would potentially feel. So to give you some context before I show you kind of how the tech demo works is, if you go to our site, that's really just a landing page right now, what you'll see is 2 people trying to give each other a high five. And what you may notice as you scroll your mouse left and right is one of them is virtual. And that really ties to the vision, whereas something as simple as touching someone's hand, how much emotion and meaning that can convey when you're not with someone. I mean, we're seeing that now more than ever. Imagine people that can't give someone a hug for a year or even 2 years because of the shelter at home because of COVID-19. And so this is really kind of our vision in the purest form, and how we went about creating this interaction to be even feasible is in a novel way. So we are technologists at our core, but we really hate when technology encumbers us. My CTO, Isaac, likes to say, we don't like to be slaves to technology. We want technology to work for us and fade away in the background when we're not using it. So how we've been able to enable this virtual high five, if you will, is by creating this sense of touch mid-air. So our device, for those of you who can't see it on the video screen, looks like a speaker. For all intents and purposes, it really is a speaker. And using the sound imagery, a team of physicists that are much smarter than myself have been able to create force fields using ultrasound energy. And just like you go to a concert, you have DJ Reum, you have Reum playing music.
Sly, what you may have to do is stop the sound on the video. It's overpowering your voice.
Oh, sorry about that. Well, let me start that over just in case. How's that?
Yeah, better.
So the device that we've created is a speaker for all intents and purposes. And we have a bunch of PhDs that are a lot smarter than myself that have been able to program this speaker that uses ultrasound to create force fields that you can feel midair with your bare hands. The principle is similar to if you go to a concert and you feel the bass speaker on your chest, for instance. Sound is a mechanical wave and it can create a pressure. We've just been able to do it at extremely high precision. So something as simple as, picking up a teddy bear that's virtually there and passing it to someone else on the other side of the world, to education. Imagine being able to play or touch the surface of the moon, play different musical instruments virtually, or really simple things that are really meditative. Like imagine sculpting a virtual clay pot with your bare hands. We can do that, and that's the dream of getting this in the hands of developers to build these experiences. And at the core, it's all about social. You can do these experiences as a single user, but it's way more powerful to be able to do this and connect with someone that is not there, because ultimately that's what matters the most to us as founders. And ultimately, if you ask yourselves, like, if you died tomorrow, what will you regret, or what will you wish you had spent more time doing? Most people will answer like spending time with loved ones. So we're not trying to replicate or replace the human experience of being together, but really just enhance it and get to the next paradigm when you just can't be in the same place as your loved ones. So that's kind of a high level of how the technology works. There is a little bit more to it that I can show if you want, where it does utilize other technologies that are on a really explosive curve right now, like augmented reality and virtual reality.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what you're doing is amazing. And that coupled with the advancements in augmented reality and virtual reality, especially now during COVID times, what was going to happen perhaps years from now is probably going to happen a hell of a lot quicker because there's a motivation for it behind it. That was very helpful, especially for those that could visually see it. I do have some questions for you. So nothing ever goes as smoothly as the so-called business plan, as if we do business plans anymore, whatever, a one-page summary or a 3-slide PowerPoint deck, whatever it might be. How have you and your partners, with the help of M13, adapted? They say that there really is only 3 things you could do in terms of, here's my game plan. Either I quit, I pivot and adapt, or what we're doing is great, let's just stay the course.
Actually, our answer to that question might be a little different than what listeners might expect, in that M13 has really helped us see the opportunity that has faced us in these times of COVID. Now, originally, in response to the pandemic, I think every single business in the world tried to go into a hole. Not maybe people maybe in the medical tech space, remote education really sees the opportunity very quickly, but every other business probably went into a hole very quickly, preserved cash burn, try to extend runway. We did that too originally, but as we've become more aware of the situation and getting continuous inbound from investors, partners, developers, and end consumers of how badly people want our product and technology, M13 has really helped us understand, and especially Carl Alamar at M13, the managing partner there, has said, when everyone else is looking down and going into a hole, that's when you got to make sure you don't pass up opportunities that might be before you. And we've just seen that consumer behaviors have shifted dramatically. Courtney was just mentioning that M13 looks 6 months ahead. We're seeing that 6 months from now, consumers and their spending behaviors will vary drastically based, versus how they were spending 6 months previously. And people are buying new consumer products, new consumer hardware. They're downloading new apps for social, to stay in touch with people that they care about. It's really been a huge shift in almost magnifying what problem that we're solving and what we're passionate about. So it's been really great to have an investor, and our lead investor, support us in taking advantage of the situation. We think we can establish ourselves as the company in the market that is trying to solve and augment the human experience when in a virtual space.
Excellent. And Courtney, where do you see the greatest opportunities kind of right now during COVID and post-COVID, given the verticals that you're in, opportunities, challenges that are presented by the current environment?
Sure. Are you talking just in life and workforce in general, or investment opportunities?
Investment opportunities.
Yeah. I think you've certainly seen a lot of interesting virtual communities pop up, right?
Yes.
If you're not able to find your tribe the way you used to at a socializing and physical event, how do you do that online? It's this really interesting time of, we've hired 3 or 4 people at M13 over the last few months that I've still never met. It's amazing how I feel like I know a bunch of them, having been on a zillion Zoom calls. But if you were someone that hadn't necessarily found some of your hobbies or some of your tribe, it's very weird to meet all of these people or find all of them the first time virtually. So anything we can do to break down those walls. Mental health is a big space where we spend a lot of time. It was one of our prime targets prior to COVID, but unfortunately it's only augmented between, loneliness and the things COVID are doing and some of the negative repercussions it can have. So that's an area where we're still very keen. And, I think without going into dissertation on it, I do think things like fintech and housing are changes that would have happened over 5 years are going to happen very quickly with COVID and social distancing and everything else. And so those are all things we're looking at very, very closely.
How many companies currently approximately is M13 invested in?
So our first fund, which was about 100 million, but it was a non-institutional fund, meaning my brother and I were doing a combination of our own personal capital with SPVs. And so we did some very large deals and some very small deals, and had a lot of flexibility. That fund had probably almost 100 companies in it of varying sizes. This most recent fund 2, which is really a seed and Series A focused fund with some occasional select later deals. That one has about 25 companies in it. We kind of call them core positions versus feeder positions. We have, if it's 24 companies, it's roughly split between feeder positions and core positions. So SLY is one of our core positions for sure.
And I mean, you and your brother and your whole company must see thousands of deals a year. So you're going to invest in relatively a very, very, very select number of that. What process do you have that's different than others in terms of sorting through the opportunity, yet being careful? We're all going to make mistakes. So there's going to be some you're going to see and pass on. One of our family offices in like 1999 shared a story at one of my events about passing on Google. Not a good move. But he jokes about it now. It's kind of funny. And he's willing to talk about it on stage. But how do you source? Well, we kind of spoke a little bit about how you source, but how do you make decisions on the entrepreneurs you invest in? And do you ever look back and say, damn, I missed out on that one?
Yeah, sure. So I can tell you, I alone see over 1,000 deals a year, and I don't spend all my time on the venture side by any means. So we're in the process of actually kind of figuring out where we're at, where we are year to date 2020, but you can extrapolate that. If I have a couple other partners and other people doing sourcing, I don't think it's a stretch. I think we easily see 5,000 deals a year. Last I looked, we had kind of, let's say, had some communication with about 1,000 of those, and probably almost half of those we either take, an introductory phone call, even a 30-minute phone call, and it could lead to more. And so that's just a lot of sheer volume for anyone, especially a firm our size. So I think the key is, I don't want to ever say, I want everyone to feel like they can send us a deal. You never know where the next great deal will come from. So I could easily see that 5,000 number going up. Having that initial call, I don't want to say no to something because you can only get so much color off a deck and everything else. But I think the key in terms of optimization and time management is to be really good between those 1,000 introductory calls and then deciding who you go further on. That's the point where you can get sucked in too easily. So we try to be really fast about saying no, or really fast about saying we're not going to dig in here, or here are the 2 or 3 key metrics that we don't think we can get comfortable with. And so, yeah, it's an educated guess. You will always be wrong and look back and say, oh, if we missed this, that, or the other. But we try to we do quarterly reviews of deals that got funded by firms that we respect, that we either didn't see or didn't participate in. And it's always great to look back and say, okay, why did we not invest in this, or what did someone else see? So that's the best thing I'd say we're trying to do from a learning and firm optimization point of view.
Yeah, that's one of the things we actually see for more rigorous and institutional, in this case, heavy investing SFOs, is looking at what they may have missed on, what others are doing, and then tracking how maybe their governance or their investment decision-making process, it's never going to be perfect, but how we could all admit to have a beginner's mindset and how we could be willing to improve. We get stuck in our silos and in our perception that we know it all, where we're not open-minded to things that come a little bit out of left field, so to speak. Sly, a question for you. This is going to be a little bit intriguing. Let's see how I'm going to articulate it. I heard a podcast yesterday, so this is just off the top of my head. It was by Stephen Drubner and Angela Duckworth, by the way, two well-known folks that now have their own podcast. It's great. I highly recommend it. I think it's called No Stupid Questions or something like that. And they're talking about, to some degree, what makes someone creative, which in theory relates to being an entrepreneur. And there was a little bit of a common trait they find. So we're going to take a little bit of a psychology lesson with you now, Sly. There was often a dislocation early in their childhood that causes them to look at things differently. They also gave an example, and this is a great example. I think Courtney will appreciate this because even he hasn't thought of this one. It's like a comedian. A comedian goes on stage and into the room, and they look for things that others don't see, something that is wrong. They have a different type of mind. Was there anything specific to you, either an early age problem, a dislocation, something that caused angst, that caused you to look at things differently than how most people do?
I think my entire childhood caused me to look at things differently than how most people do.
We nailed it with you.
That my parents are Chinese immigrants, and I grew up in a predominantly homogeneous town in the deep South in Mississippi. So I think it was just a fact of daily life. But I wasn't aware how different I was actually growing up. But I would say every challenge that I faced was from a very unique perspective, and I had to approach that as such, because there weren't a lot of people that could empathize with that journey. But I can think of something that actually might be that might change the mindset of how I took action upon my path to entrepreneurship. And that's interesting. I hadn't heard about that theory, but I really like the book Originals, I think it is, where he demystifies the fact that there are just some super geniuses that are creative out there. I do believe that everyone has the creativity inside them, and even the idea behind our company, Emerge, is not a new one. This dream that we're chasing has been dreamed of before, probably 60 years ago, but we are the ones that decided to actually tackle it and pursue it. And it's about staying true to our vision and grit and determination. And actually execution seems to be the more rare quality to find in people. But more related to your question, before the tech world, I did work in developing countries and almost died in a few countries, almost got my hands cut off in a very close to boating accident while being a scientific diver, and having those very scary experiences, I think, changed my perspective on what is risk. And people often say being an entrepreneur is the most risky thing, jump off a cliff and you assemble the parachute on the way down, or the plane on the way down, as Reid Hoffman says. I think once I went through working in some of those developing countries, the risk of being a founder was a welcome one, and it was very easy to chase what is considered a moonshot, or was considered a moonshot 5 years ago, now considered an inevitable reality, in 1 or 2 years. So yeah, I think I've been fortunate, the fact that I have been given these opportunities.
And Angela, if I could just say one thing.
Yes, please. I was going to follow up the same question with you from a VC perspective.
Yeah, well, I'll just pick the part that resonated with me, which was creativity. I'll tell you, when you're, as I said, I started my career at Goldman Sachs, not a job that is synonymous with creativity. And when there's too much creativity, that's probably when you get into trouble. So I always thought, okay, I'm not a creative person. I'm an analytical person, blah, blah, blah. I don't have any ideas to start something. when I actually wasn't working 80 to 100 hours a week and made the space to think about ideas, I was actually shocked how many I came up with when I, took a little break from Goldman before becoming an entrepreneur. And even now, but I love this little, I don't know if anyone reads Paul Graham's stuff, but he has a great little piece called Maker versus Manager. And
it's great. It's great.
That if you're a manager, I'm having meetings all day, people are coming to my office, I'm going to theirs. If I'm a maker and I'm a creative person, I really have to set aside that time, because if I was an artist and I only had one thing to do today, but I had a meeting with Angelo at noon, I wake up in the morning and I'm trying to kind of get the creative juices flowing, but then in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I have Angelo at noon, and even at 9:30, then I'm like, oh, it's 11, it's 11:30, and it can just throw off the whole process. And so I'm by no means great at doing this, but what I aspire to do when I want to be creative, and creative can mean thinking of new ideas, it can mean thinking of ways that our firm can do better, it could be thinking of whatever. Creativity means lots of different things. I try a couple days a week to block off a long period of time. For me, it's usually kind of in the late afternoon, evening, let's call it like 4 to 8 p.m., where I don't book anything and I can actually just let my mind be a little more free to go for a walk and think about these things. So I'm convinced that it's in everyone. You just kind of have to, have ideal or optimal circumstances to let the juices flow.
I agree with you. I mean, I do think there are elements that happen early in our life, like what I described from the podcast with Drubner and Duckworth. That is true in terms of how we look at things differently. And of course, now you're going to want to hire a comedian to go source entrepreneurial talent, because they look at things totally differently and only see problems that entrepreneurs will hopefully have solutions for. But what I liked about what you said reminds me of someone else I'm also a big fan of, James Altucher, who has the idea, somewhat like what you said, that we have creativity inside us. It needs to be worked on to enhance and get better. And why don't you think of 10 new ideas a day? And by the way, most of them, as you look at them, as you write them down, let's say that's 50 a week, Monday through Friday, the vast majority are going to suck, and that's okay. You're exercising your thoughts, putting them on paper with a business idea, something entrepreneurial, something creative. And if you walk out of that week with 1, 2, or 3 ideas that may have legs on them, that's well over 150 ideas for the course of the year that are, and maybe 5 of them become something awesome. So yes, I do agree that's important. I do think it's something that could be exercised. I mean, we could talk about design thinking up at Stanford and other ways of getting creative. There's lots of different philosophies to do that. But if you don't do it, then nothing's going to happen. Yeah, there are people that are more inclined to be more creative than others, but I do think, and I agree with you too, actually late afternoons are probably the best time. You do analytical stuff in the morning and save creative time for later in the day. Being mindful in the moment, having potentially meditation practices and all that are all things that could help to free up your productivity and your time in terms of being more creative. On that note, and related to that, Courtney, among the investments you made that are showing the best early traction, are there any common threads with the entrepreneurs or investors that you're starting to pick up on that I know is going to adapt and change all the time, but being a little bit analytical by nature, like you admitted, are there certain trends, big data trends that you're noticing?
It's a great question. I don't know that there's big data trends because, we're not only doing 3 or 4 categories. We've got kind of a broader portfolio than that. I just think in the world we're living in, it's the entrepreneurs that do better so far are the ones that I think are flexible, right? They're not focused on year one, you're not focused on a revenue number, you're focused on learnings, right? And so we kind of like to say, like, test something, iterate that test, then move, test, iterate, move. And the more I think you can continue to have that test and learn mindset, the further you get, even though it might not show up on a P&L. And so I'm not necessarily as much a believer in the big pivot, even though obviously there's some great stories of the companies that have done the big pivot. I'm kind of more of a learning, test, iterate, move fan. And so I think the ones that we've seen do some of that have had some nice learnings, especially during these COVID times.
Yeah, no, that's very insightful. And Sly, as we're kind of taking it a little bit to the home stretch, would you define or would you consider yourself to be resilient and gritty? Do you have passion and purpose behind an idea and are willing to overcome? And again, this relates to my last question to you and the ability to have blinders on, yet be careful because sometimes you do got to pivot. But how do you consider your grittiness, which is something, speaking of Angela Duckworth, her book is called Grit. That's what she's most well known for. She's a professor at Penn. So how gritty, how resilient would you think that you are?
You know, people talk about grit a lot, especially early stage. And even though it is talked about a lot, I think it is one of those subjects that's not overly communicated because it is so important. And especially early stage, the grit amongst the co-founders, I think, is the most important. Because it's those relationships, you know, they're essentially your family in the early years, in the early days when you're building a startup. I think I would classify actually my grit in the context of my co-founders because we formed such a strong bond that the grit was communal. So I actually lived with my co-founders for the first 2 years of Emerge. And one of my co-founders at the time was married and had a 1-year-old son, now 5 years old. We helped raise his son in the startup in the same house as we were building Emerge and soldering and having hardware benches and you know, laptops everywhere. And my other co-founder, I shared a room with him after he got married and his wife for 6 months while building Emerge. And so it was really this like grit that, now that I'm saying this, extends past the co-founders into the co-founding family that we've established. And now I am married myself, and you know, all 6 of us, ourselves and our wives, are just extremely close, and Nico, so 6.5, are just extremely close. And whenever we went through a hard day or when we were passed upon by various VCs or opportunities, just having each other, I think, was the strongest and easiest way to get past those difficult times, having grit as a team as opposed to just grit as an individual, which I like to think I have, but it was just so much stronger with each other.
Excellent points. The everyday person, and I mean that respectfully, talks about work-life balance. And it does make me jealous as kind of an entrepreneur because I feel I'm not necessarily great with that. I feel in some ways I'm married to my entity, my company, my business. It's not 9 to 5, even 13 years in now needing to adapt with COVID-19 and become digital. It almost feels new again. And in some ways that's kind of invigorating. So I'm not saying it's all bad. Given that you're now married, and I believe you noted have a child, and so do your co-founders.
I don't have a child yet. We do
okay,
have
not yet. That's
furry child it was a 100-pound German Shepherd we just adopted. Not a human child.
Yeah, I have a big dog too, so that's going to be almost as challenging and hard. But boy, it's not easy. I mean, this is what you're doing is not 9 to 5. And do you know, what tips would you give someone that is starting something from nothing that stereotypically is living on ramen noodles and caffeine? And really, you made sacrifices that in theory, not to be negative, may not pay off. We don't really know. But I mean, I had to do this too, going back 13 years ago and theoretically now. What made you really think about making these sacrifices and the challenges that you do have, even now being married, to work-life balance?
I think the answer to that question really goes back to something a little bit deeper, in that when advice I would give to budding entrepreneurs is when you start a company, you have to make sure you're starting it for the right reasons that will endure past the hardships, because shit will hit the fan and it will hit it constantly. You can count on that. But the reason you start the company will really sustain your ability to continue or not, and have the work-life balance you want or not. When we started Emerge, it was to create an impact on the world. We actually had very nice, comfortable lives before Emerge, but we gave that up. The background that I have now in my Zoom call is actually one of my first jobs in Hawaii. I would scuba dive for a living in remote islands and all across the Indo-Pacific. And that was amazing. I would get paid to do that. But yet, when I looked at creating this meaningful impact, I felt like a little longing for something more. And so I use this as a reminder of what I gave up to build Emerge. And the work-life balance thing, I never really, maybe it's just my upbringing, but I never really believed in that phrase. And at Emerge, we don't really believe in that phrase either, more so than work-life harmony. And you're alluding to this too, Angelo, as well, the fact that COVID-19 has caused you this line between work and your personal life at home to be extremely blurred. And it's not always good. Right? I've gotten in a lot of arguments with my wife, and all of my fault, of course. But
you better say that.
Yeah, she's right there. But really learning. Yeah, Courtney, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. No, I was just going to say, I totally agree. I think I get why people use phrases like work-life balance, but Reed Hastings, I heard one time when I heard him speak live, talked about work-life continuum, which is a work-life spectrum, which I think is a better way to put it, at least for the way I've lived, because going back to the Goldman days, I worked every weekend for years and years and years. And so now doing work on a weekend doesn't feel stressful for me. It's like if I was watching some football, if that even still happens, and while you're doing a little work, or I do a hard workout and then you're relaxing, it doesn't feel like that. But I also just think that work-life balance is such a funny term, because I believe that a lot of the best things happen to you in life when you're out of balance. You're working really hard.
How true.
You have to do it for a period and then come back to something more balanced, because you can't work 100 hours a week forever, but it's nice to do it when you're getting something off the ground, or say you're trying to get in shape. Of course, you have to be out of balance and put more into your diet and exercise, and then come back to something that's more homeostatic that you can maintain. So that's what I believe for work-life balance, but I think it is a bit of a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
I could ask you, Courtney, as we conclude, it's somewhat of a similar question. You had an exit, a successful exit. You don't need to be doing this. What drives you in your grit, your passion and purpose to be a VC?
I'm so glad you asked me that, because that would be a great one for me to end on personally, because, I lovingly say the world doesn't need another venture capital firm. But I think that really our goal is twofold. One is to create I think venture as an asset class is going to need to change how it adds value over the next 5 or 10 years, but probably even sooner than 5 years. And so if we could be some small part of the discussion in terms of, wow, look at someone like M13, how they're set up very differently. Thus they can add very different value, just like, and Andreessen Horowitz really changed up the model of how they add value. And so hopefully we can learn from them and build on certain things. And so I would say on the venture side, that's really our goal. And then on the brand development side, on our brand studio, as I mentioned, we have partnerships with Procter & Gamble and Target, and we have another one we're about to announce. Wouldn't it be amazing if 5 or 10 years from now, people had a different expectation of the way Fortune 100 companies worked with startup ventures and entrepreneurs like M13? And wouldn't it be great if we were a small part of moving that conversation forward as well? So those are my 2 big, hairy, audacious goals for the future of M13 and what motivates me.
Excellent. And Courtney, for those that would like to learn more about you, about M13, how could they learn more about the company?
Well, you can definitely check out, we try to put, my email, which is very easy for anyone, is just Courtney@m13.co, not .com. That's kind of out. .co is more trendy. No, we couldn't get m13.com, but anyways, you can always reach out and email me. Otherwise, we try to do a lot of thought leadership. So we do a lot on LinkedIn. We do a lot of webinars, and you can get updated on all those by just subscribing through our website, m13.co.
And Sly, for those that are interested in following your technology, potentially seeing when it's available and potentially learning more about it, how could they learn more about Emerge?
People can go to our website, which is emergenow.io. And they can also email me. It's s@emergenow.io, the letter S. And I'm sure you'll have a link in your bio and on this podcast as well.
Yes, and Emerge is spelled as I would expect, EMERGE, and that's .io, correct?
That's right.
Excellent. Well, it was really, really exciting to have both of you on the show. It was a lot of fun. It feels like the little bit longer than an hour just kind of flew right on by. Everyone, I am Angelo Robles. I'm the host of Angelo Robles' Effective Family Office podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart, and other platforms, and founder and CEO at Family Office Association, a global membership organization dedicated to families of great success and their single family offices. In today's world, we're doing a tremendous amount of original proprietary content and hosting hundreds of Zoom meetings over the course of a year or 12-month period for our members to be very interactive with each other, with peer-to-peer, and with wonderful guests like we had on today. We have a significant series of master classes, of programs on becoming resilient, anti-fragile inside your family office, and a tremendous amount of creative thought leadership that is happening like has never happened before with us. So it's a good time to potentially jump on in, join FOA, be an active member. I'm incredibly active on social media, so on all platforms. YouTube could be recommended because of all the good video interviews we're putting up, and it's a very easy name. It simply is Family Office. I registered it a long time ago when YouTube first came out. So simply I'm Family Office on YouTube, active on all platforms. And our website, and I believe by next Monday, finally, our new website, more so for the live listeners, will be up. It's familyofficeassociation.com, and my email is angelo@familyofficeassociation.com. Thank you to the live listeners, those that will watch this on YouTube or hear it on a podcast. Thank you so much. We appreciate your support, and special thanks to Courtney and Sly as our special guests today. Thank you so much, gentlemen.